random
I
example.
never look at the internet.
Yeah, but other people might. Oh, well, good to be back with you. We're going to finish up our Numbers passage tonight. I don't know what else to say about it. We've been journeying through Numbers, this In the Wilderness, which is a much better title than the book of Numbers. But it gets, of course, its title from the two censuses. Since we didn't get an answer on that. Censuses, I don't know what the plural of census is, but it's got more than one census in it. Just as a reminder, we got 3 sections. The getting ready to go into the wilderness, which has our first census in it. Wandering about the wilderness, which has the great disobedient stories that we'll finish up tonight. And then getting ready to go into the land. And so literally by the end of Numbers, you've come to sort of a cliffhanger that Deuteronomy doesn't add much to. In fact, the whole book of Deuteronomy, which we'll start looking at probably next week, is just Moses' 3 last sermons while they're standing there getting ready to go into the land. So that it doesn't move the story. They don't move very far in the book of Deuteronomy. They all stand in Moab waiting to go into the land. And when Deuteronomy ends, we still haven't gotten anywhere. It ends with a cliffhanger as well. So it's fascinating that you don't occupy the land. So you've had scholars that have suggested that Numbers sort of ended that first group of books that we now call the Pentateuch. And Deuteronomy kind of started the next part of the story. And then you've had people that say, no, you need to go through Joshua because that's how you finally get the story, tied it up and finished up. So scholars argue about all sorts of things in that regard. But Numbers is not a bad place to sort of end and prepare for that ending. So we're going to look at that. Now, we looked at the disobedience of Aaron and Miriam. We talked about that last week. To me, one of the funniest disobedience stories in the whole Bible. Then we had the disobedience of all the people as they were getting ready to go into the land, and they lacked faith in that regard. And now we have the culmination of our disobedience stories coming in Numbers 20. So we'll look at that. The Israelites, you have any questions before we get going, before we do that? I should have asked first. I get wound up. You got to jump in sometimes if I get wound up. The Israelites, the whole congregation, came into the wilderness of Zin in the first month, and the people stayed at Kadesh. Miriam died there and was buried there. Now there was no water for the congregation, so they gathered together against Moses and against Aaron. The people quarreled with Moses and said, "Would that we had died when our kindred died before the Lord. Why have you brought the assembly of the Lord into this wilderness for us and our livestock to die here? Why have you brought us up out of Egypt to bring us to this wretched place? It is no place for grain or figs or vines or pomegranates." These people have very specific desires that they want to make sure that you understand. And there is no water to drink. So Moses and Aaron went away from the assembly to the entrance of the tent of meeting. They fell on their faces. The glory of the Lord appeared to them. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Take the staff, assemble the congregation, you and your brother Aaron, command the rock before their eyes to yield its water. Thus you shall bring water out of the rock for them. Thus you shall provide drink for the congregation and their livestock." This probably feels a little familiar, or it should. Do you remember when this happened once before? Back in Exodus. Do you remember how we got water that time? That's right. Moses actually took his staff and hit the rock back in Exodus. However, now God has changed the way we're going to do things. We're not doing things the way we've always done them. We're going to do things a little bit new. And now you just speak to the rock and it will come out. So just go and talk to the rock and water is going to come out of the rock. All right. Now, Moses has a leadership challenge here. He's got the entire congregation of Israel ready to kill him and ready to kill Aaron. And I think, sort of we always run the danger of reverse psychoanalyzing people from text 3,000 years ago, but I think there is serious concern about just how active this looks in the story. Exactly how much of a leader he looks. I feel like this is a little passive for Moses. This whole go out and talk to the rock thing, I feel Moses is worried won't really establish his authority like Moses might want. You want something, and plus we're trying a new thing, and you know how churches are about trying new stuff, right? I mean, we don't want to, we knew it worked before, we got to do it the same way. Well, Moses takes the staff from before the Lord. So far, so good. That's what God said. So he's on board so far. As he had commanded him, Moses and Aaron gathered the assembly together before the rock. Okay, so good. And he said to them, okay, now we're running off the rails. He was supposed to talk to the rock. He decided to talk to the people. "Listen, you rebels, shall we bring water for you out of this rock?" Any guesses to the antecedent of that particular pronoun? Any thoughts to who you think Moses means when he says we? Go ahead, Ron.
I'm not sure.
You know, not going to take a swing. Who's we?
Royal we.
It's the royal we. We shall give you water. That's even worse. I mean, what are our options here? God and Moses.
Moses and Aaron.
Moses and Aaron. Or the royal we, which I think would be the worst of all of them. Either way, you notice Moses is included in this group, right? Moses wants to make absolutely clear to the people that I'm part of this. And I kind of lean toward God. I kind of lean toward Moses saying, you know, the Lord and me, we're tight. And we've got this understanding. And we are the ones who are bringing you people water. And you need to remember that. So Moses lifted up his hand and struck the rock twice with his staff. So it didn't work the first time. You know, when you try things the way you always used to try them, you got to work twice as hard sometimes to get the same results. And that's what happens here. Water comes out abundantly. I've always thought that was interesting. Even with Moses' disobedience, God still provides for the people. And the congregation and their livestock drank. But the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, because you did not trust in me to show my holiness before the eyes of the Israelites, therefore you shall not bring this assembly into the land that I have given them. These are the waters of Meribah, where the people of Israel quarreled with the Lord, and which he showed his holiness. So Meribah means quarreling. So that's why we named them Meribah. Same thing. Massa, Meribah before, Meribah now. It's two same places because they've been quarreling since Exodus, basically, on that. So this is the reason. If you want to know why Moses doesn't get to the promised land, here you go. One little mistake. Yes, Steve? No? I thought you had a thought.
Other than what Cecil beat the bill.
Right. You know, any thoughts or questions or concerns?
Didn't just speak to the rock?
He didn't. He could have spoke to the rock, and that would have done it.
Shut up. Maybe.
He spoke. Maybe. You got to take chances sometimes. He should. I had a student once say, so he spoke to the people and hit the rock, and I said, yeah. He said he should have spoke to the rock and hit the people.
That's good.
That's not a bad move. I honestly believe that this is all out of a fear of leadership. I really do. That this is a fear of their challenge to his leadership, and that God's way was too passive. It did not look like Moses was someone you needed to listen to, or Moses was afraid to trust in God to establish that leadership, and decided to take some steps to make sure the people remember just who was Moses and who wasn't. And I think, you know, I always get the one little mistake, man. He loses the promised land for one little mistake. And my argument is always that it's the same reason that Miriam and Aaron's punishment came on them. God comes to them and says, why were you not afraid to talk about Moses? We're talking about Moses. He's the Moses here. Moses is different. Moses is special. I speak to Moses face to face. That's the problem here. Moses is different. Moses is special. God speaks to Moses face to face. God gave Moses a way to go, and Moses decided that he didn't trust in that, and so he loses the promised land as a result of it. He never does come to grips with this, by the way. We'll see that in Deuteronomy. Go ahead, Bob.
So the chronology, last week there was a statement that only Joshua and Caleb were going into the promised land.
They would go in the promised land. We didn't. Moses was still on the fence at that point. As was Aaron, that we find out, and Miriam. They were not specifically mentioned as not going. That was stated in the positive. Only, you know, Joshua and Caleb would go in, and we're still hanging out.
But it was one generation, right?
It was.
So
Everybody
was this
over 20.
After a generation?
This was. This is after God said that everybody under 20 gets to go in, and nobody over 20 gets to go in except Joshua and Caleb. Or actually, it only says Caleb. Joshua gets added a little bit later. But Moses, we don't know about Moses until this, and the answer is no, not Moses. He does make it on the Sunday of Transfiguration, so that's nice. So eventually, but not yet. All right. Yes, ma'am.
This may be even a different story, but
That's fine.
What about Moses killing someone? Didn't he kill someone?
At the beginning of the story.
And that was why he wasn't?
No, that's fine.
Okay.
God forget that.
That was fine, all right.
Yeah, you know, before he got saved.
He had it
You know,
covered.
he made a profession of faith in the local
Okay.
Baptist church after that.
Okay.
Everything was fine. Yeah, everything was fine.
Okay.
No, that was what caused his fleeing into the wilderness, which
Okay.
interestingly enough, we can say that God ends up using later on in the story because He's going to spend a generation there, and it's nice that he's already spent a generation there. So he knows where all the good restaurants are and where the bathroom stops are on the road, so that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Right.
Thank you.
Always want someone who's been there before. Right? Moses has been there. All right, now we get some more of these fun stories. Moses sent messengers from Kadesh to the king of Edom. Thus says your brother Israel. Now this probably requires some unpacking. It is traditional that Esau was the progenitor of Edom. Edom in Hebrew means red. It's the same as the root word for Adam, by the way. They look exactly the same when you don't have vowels. And so it is because you might remember Esau had red hair, and so they named him Esau. They named him Harry with an I because he was. And the red is how they make that connection. So whenever Edom is spoken of in the Old Testament, it's always thought of as that brother to Israel, that sort of brother nation. And they're always judged that way too. Obadiah is a very brief prophetic book condemning the actions of Edom, and the language there is you betrayed your brother all the way through it. So that's always talked about. That's why the brother language. You know all the adversity that's befallen us, how our ancestors went down to Egypt, how we lived in Egypt a long time, the Egyptians oppressed us and our ancestors. And when we cried to the Lord, to Yahweh, proper name, he heard our voice and sent an angel and brought us out of Egypt. And here we are at Kadesh, a town on the edge of your territory. Now let us pass through your land. We'll not pass through a field or vineyard or drink water from any well. We will go along the king's highway, not turning aside to the right hand or the left until we pass through your territory. But Edom said, you shall not pass through, or we will come out with the sword against you. Well, that's not very nice. They just asked for flyover privileges. That's all they wanted. We're just going to pass through. We're not going to do anything. Edom says, no. So Israelites said, we'll stay on the highway. If we drink your water, we and our livestock will pay you for it. It's only a small matter. Just let us pass through on foot. But he said, you shall not pass through. And Edom came out against them with a large force, heavily armed. Thus Edom refused to give Israel passage through their territory, so Israel turned away from them. So instead of being able to go directly around that eastern edge of the Dead Sea and up to the Jordan River, they had to go all the way around the outside of Edom. And both of the journeys are mentioned in Numbers. In other words, there's one journey that seems to make like they went right through Edom, and then there's this one which seems like they went all the way around them. And so I don't know why both of those are in there. Maybe Moses put the itinerary in, and then they had to, they couldn't do that. I don't know, but both of those are mentioned in there, and so he went around the outside of all of that. Yeah, anything you want to talk about there?
How far are they from the Jordan?
From here, 50 miles. Well, where they are here, if you can picture, you remember your book of maps at the back of your Bible back when you were growing up? Okay, if you can picture the Dead Sea, Kadesh is to the left of the Dead Sea, and what they're asking to do is come around the bottom of the Dead Sea and go north. And so they end up having to swing further east to go all the way around Edom before coming up to the top. They're coming to the very top right edge of the Dead Sea. That's the plains of Moab where they cross over. So if I had a map, I would show you. But other concerns? Okay. So they set out from Kadesh, the Israelites. The whole congregation came to Mount Hor. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron at Mount Hor on the border of Edom, let Aaron be gathered to his people, for he shall not enter the land that I have given to the Israelites, because you rebelled against my command at the waters of Meribah. I've always loved that. Aaron can't come in because you were bad. It's like, Aaron had plenty of reason why he shouldn't be allowed in. I don't think there's any reason to blame Moses on this. Aaron has made golden calves. Aaron has joined in Miriam in her rebellion. Aaron joined with Moses in his rebellion. There's plenty of reasons, but we'll go ahead and blame Aaron or Moses on that.
Just get back to Edom.
Yes,
why
please.
Again, why does Edom not permit them to pass through?
Because
one of those things.
It's our country, and you don't get to walk over it. Yeah, I like your kind of people walking through our country. So, lower our property values and ruin our schools. I don't know. This is not an uncommon thing. I mean, Israel tried this with Egypt, and that was dumb. When you're Edom and the army is smaller than yours, you get away with that. But at one point in 609, Israel said to Pharaoh, as he's going to oppose the Babylonians, no, you can't come across our land. So Pharaoh killed the king and just went up to the land. So that's what happens. Take Aaron and his son Eleazar. I'm sorry, other questions? No? Okay. Take Aaron and his son Eleazar, bring them up Mount Hor, strip Aaron of his vestments, put them on his son Eleazar, But Aaron shall be gathered to his people and shall die there. Moses did as the Lord commanded. They went up to Mount Hor in the sight of the whole congregation. Moses stripped Aaron of his vestments, put them on his son Eleazar, and Aaron died there on top of the mountain. Moses and Eleazar came down from the mountain. When all the congregation saw that Aaron had died, all the house of Israel mourned for Aaron for 30 days. So this is the passing of the guard of high priest now. It goes on to Aaron's son Eleazar, and then it will be passed on shortly from here. So I wanted to get that transition. Now, as they're going through, you can see we're starting to get ready to go into the land. When the Canaanite, the king of Arad, that is in the southern part, so just to the west of the Dead Sea, southwest of the Dead Sea, heard that Israel was coming by the way of Atharim, he fought against Israel and took some of them captive. And Israel made a vow to the Lord and said, if you'll indeed give this people into our hands, we will utterly destroy their towns. The Lord listened to the voice of the Israel, handed over the Canaanites, and utterly destroyed them and their towns. So the place was called Hormah. So this is some of the first battles you see of the Promised Land. These are like the southern edge of the Canaanites. Eventually in Joshua, the story there is told that they go in through the middle of the country. But this is sort of the southern edge as they're going around. And they have these battles, the beginnings of these battles here. So, yes, another rebellion story. From Mount Hor, they set out the way of the Red Sea to go around the land of Edom, but the people became impatient on the way, again. The people spoke against God and against Moses. Why have you brought us out of Egypt to die in the wilderness? Is this the only complaint they have? This is their go-to on this. Why did we ever leave Egypt? For there is no food, no water, and we detest this miserable food. They're toddlers. That's what they are. Then the Lord sent poisonous serpents among the people, and they bit the people, so that many Israelites died. The people came to Moses and said, we've sinned by speaking against the Lord and against you. Pray to the Lord to take away the serpents from us. So Moses prayed for the people, and the Lord said to Moses, make a poisonous serpent, set it on a pole, and everyone who's bitten shall look at it and live. So Moses made a serpent of bronze, put it upon a pole, and wherever the serpent bit someone, that person would look on the serpent of bronze and live. Well, there you go.
Idols.
Well, no, not when God says it's okay. Yeah. God's all, remember we said, right after God says, don't ever make a graven image of anything above the earth or on the earth or under the earth. And then he says in the making of the Ark of the Covenant, except put 2 cherubim on the Ark of the Covenant because those are really cool. So when God says to do it, it's not idolatry anymore. But it does become idolatry. We find out later on that this thing which is supposed to be a focus of their faith becomes an object of their faith. It's supposed to focus them on the divine. Instead, they start worshiping this in and of itself. And that becomes a problem later on. But here, I've always thought it was fascinating, the serpent on the pole. That's just, you think of the caduceus, that Greek symbol. This Middle Eastern association of healing and serpents is fascinating, or even the Mediterranean association is fascinating. I don't know what it means, but it feels like it means something. Yeah.
So he didn't get rid of the serpent?
No, he didn't get rid of the serpents.
Seems like that would have been
And they
easier.
kept on biting people.
And they kept biting
They
people.
just didn't die.
They just didn't die, yeah. Right.
Well, it's remarkable that this is one of the stories then that's picked up in the New Testament.
It is. Jesus picks up on this one.
I know.
Yeah, in a good rabbinic way. Yeah.
Well, it's kind of a throwaway story here.
Yeah.
In terms of
Yeah.
the book of Numbers.
Yeah. They rebelled and again, and there was a plague sent again, and God provided healing again. And you're right. It doesn't add a whole lot. It is interesting, though. You might remember when I showed you the temple. This was when we were talking about Exodus. I had that temple at Timnah, the open-air temple there, that was found a 6-inch bronze serpent, which is fascinating in and of itself. But then on the back of it, to have inscribed the name Jethro, is still just. I still don't even know what to do with that. That's just fascinating. This one was much bigger than that, apparently. But it's a little bronze serpent that I guess was part of the, concession stands. Get your own bronze serpent. I don't know, have any idea what that means, but it feels like it's important. There was some sort of association of serpents and healing. So, fascinating.
This is something that's just been lost.
Yes, again, we just lose the context. Yeah. I do like Mary Margaret's point. She's right. Didn't take the serpents away. Just, you didn't die. Yeah, go ahead.
Before you go on,
Sure.
the last section there said, wherefore it is said in the book of the wars of the Lord.
Oh, the book of the war. Yes, thank you. The book of the wars of Yahweh. This is a good time as any to mention that. There are a number of sources that the Bible references. The book of the wars of Yahweh, the book of Joshua, the books of the Chronicles of the Kings of Israel, the books of the Chronicles of the Kings of Judah, all of those are mentioned as sources. And often, particularly in Kings, the Bible will say, you know, for everything else that Omri did, if you want to know, go look it up in the books of the Annals of the Kings of Israel. But he was wicked, and that's all we got to say about that. I mean, that's basically the Bible's approach is, there's more to tell to this story, but we don't care to tell that part of the story. This is our story, and this is the reason we're telling this. So, I mean, this is one of those moments, I think, you see it's helpful that the Bible acknowledges it's drawing on sources to tell the story, and it's selectively drawing on sources, and it's selectively drawing on sources because it has a particular agenda in telling this story, that there's something about it that it wants to tell. And so this is one of those times it mentions a source that's been lost to history in the books of the wars of Yahweh. I don't have any idea. It'd be nice to know. Maybe an interesting source. Yeah. We don't have it. Good pick. They turned and went up the road to Bashan. King Og of Bashan came out against them, he and all his people, to the battle of Edrei. But the Lord said to Moses, don't be afraid of him, for I've given him into your hand with all his people and all his land. You shall do to him as you did to King Sihon of the Amorites, who ruled in Heshbon. So they killed him, his sons, his people, until there was no survivor left, and took possession of his land. So they're, again, taking the land as they go around that area. Og, I only mention Og and Sihon because you probably don't ever remember hearing anything about Og or Sihon, and yet, in the book of Psalms, I only know this because of the work I was doing in my book, in the book of Psalms, when it talks about the conquest, these are the only stories that are told in the whole book of Psalms, are the stories of Sihon and Og. You don't get Jericho, you don't get Ai, you don't get Hatzor, you don't get the rededication at Shechem, you don't get any of those stories in Joshua that you would expect. In the Psalms, when they think about the great victories of the conquest, they think about Og and Sihon, who was apparently so big he had to have a special bed made. I don't know why you'd care about that, but I thought you'd like to know that he had to have a really large bed. So, again, once again, I don't know what that means, but I think it's one of those times that sort of Steve points out, it's one of those things that's lost to us. This was important to those people who wrote the Psalms, but it's something that for us, we don't even tell that story. I mean, it's one paragraph. Why do we write Psalms about it's one paragraph? I think it's Psalms 135 and 36. I think those are the two that mention. My memory's holding out on that. Moab, unlike Edom, was in great dread of the people because they were so numerous. Moab was overcome with fear of the people of Israel, and Moab said to the elders of Midian, this horde will lick up all that is around us as an ox licks up the grass of the field. Now Balak, son of Zippor, was king of Moab at the time. He sent messengers to Balaam, son of Beor at Pethor, which is on the Euphrates, in the land of Ammah, to summon him, saying, a people has come out of Egypt, they've spread over the face of the earth, and they've settled next to me. Come now, curse this people for me, since they're stronger than I. Perhaps I shall be able to defeat them and drive them from the land, for I know that whomever you bless is blessed, and whomever you curse is cursed. So it's always good to have, your independent consultant or contractors that you can call in when you have a particular need. And Balaam was someone who's apparently known. What's interesting about this is Balaam is known from extra biblical material as well. A text that was found in Deir Alai, which is part of the Transjordan, which I think part of the Transjordan could include either Edom or Moab. I think that Deir Alai is in Moab. I'm not 100% sure of that. But it's on that other side, that eastern shore of the Jordan River. This text dates from about the 9th century, and it tells this older story about a guy named Balaam, who is a seer of the gods, who was able to forecast a drought in which he mentions serving El and Adonai, or excuse me, not Adonai, Shaddaiim. Shaddai is usually translated Almighty. The name Shaddai apparently had a connection to old fertility goddesses, which is why it has the feminine ending in here. But it actually it's sort of a famous prophet / cursing guy who would loan out his services if you need somebody cursed or you need a word of prophecy. And I find it fascinating that the Bible picked. I mean, this is a famous guy that we're being told about here, which is. It's just interesting that this extra biblical prophetic source is someone that we're telling this. I don't know what it all means, but I think it's fascinating that we're picking on this guy who had a reputation, and we're going to hire him to come curse Israel. So one of those things that shows how the Bible is set within its culture. Yeah.
Just looked it up. Deir Allah. It's right on the border between Jordan and Israel.
Okay, so that's still Moab then.
Yeah.
This ancient Moab is what we're talking about. So thank you. So the elders of Moab and the elders of Midian departed with fees for divination. You got to bring your deposit, right? He's not coming unless you pay him up front. I mean, there's no way. They came to Balaam, gave him Balak's message. He said to him, "Stay here tonight, and I will bring back word to you as Yahweh speaks to me." So he's going to ask Yahweh, this God, what he's supposed to do. So the officials of Moab stayed with Balaam. God came to Balaam, El, which is interesting. Not Adonai. I don't know what. This is one of those times when looking at the names, I wonder if is significance. There might be. God came to Balaam and said, "Who are these men with you?" Balaam said to God, "King Balak, son of Zippor of Moab, has sent me this message. A people has come out of Egypt, spread over the face of the earth. Come, curse me. Perhaps I'll fight against them and drive them out." God said to Balaam, "You shall not go with them. You shall not curse the people, for they are blessed." So Balaam rose in the morning and said to the officials of Balak, "Go to your own land, for the Lord has refused to let me go with you." So the officials of Moab rose and went to Balak and said, "Balaam refuses to come with us." Once again, Balak sent officials more numerous and more distinguished than these. They came to Balaam and said to him, "Thus says Balak, son of Zippor." This is rhetorically ramping up the language, right? You might recognize "Thus says the Lord." Before, it was, gave him this message, "Stay here." He just gave him his message, so we don't have exactly what they said. Here, "Thus says Balak" is saying, hey, the king has said that you need to come. So this is rhetorically raising the stakes. "Don't let anything hinder you from coming to me, for I will surely do you great honor, and whatever you say to me, I will do. Come, curse this people for me." But Balaam replied to the servants of Balak, "Although Balak were to give me his house full of silver and gold, I could not go beyond the command of the Lord my God to do less or more. You remain here," and the others did, "so that I may learn what more the Lord may say to me." Many interpreters read this as a fee negotiation tactic here, that he's trying to get more money out of this deal. And it's possible. "Well, you gave me everything. I couldn't go." Try it. No, maybe. We'll see. That night, God came to Balaam and said, "If the men have come to you to summon you, get up, go with them, but do only what I tell you to do." So Balaam got up in the morning, saddled his donkey, and went off with the officials of Moab. So now God has told him that he can go on back. Again, not Yahweh, Elohim. I find that interesting. I don't know what it means, but again, I think it means something. So questions before we get to the cool part that you all know? Yeah?
You may have said this and I missed it, but Moses is not here now?
He's there. Yes.
He is. He's very much not.
He's in the background. Yeah, he's in the background. Well, we've switched the setting. We've jumped over here to the king of Moab, who's summoning Balaam to come and curse them, led by Moses, as they go.
But the consultant's talking to God.
The consultant, however, seems to be talking to God.
Yeah, just a point.
and negotiating fee. Yes, yeah. Dickering over fees. Yes, also like the consultant. Yes.
Just trying to remember, is there a strain of thinking, maybe in like the secular interpretation of this, that the Elohists and the Yahwists were possibly two separate cults or deities or personas that could have eventually melded together?
Most understand it is as...
Or like two different sources?
Yeah, two different sources and probably countries. In other words, the southern kingdom, the Yahwist, right. The northern kingdom, the Elohist, that they bring together. That's the reason that Psalms 1 to 41 use the term Yahweh. Psalms 42 to 84 prefer the term Elohim. And so most people assume that psalm book came from the north and was added on to the southern psalm book. And because 14 and 53, I believe, are duplicated psalms, and the only difference is 14 says Yahweh and 53 says Elohim. And so the suggestion is that they come from two different sources, possibly Northern Kingdom, Southern Kingdom divisions. That is complete speculation because we really just don't have enough to know where these things come from. Yeah, it's a good question. Other thoughts before we have to listen to Ron promote the contractor instead of the consultant again? No, okay, there we go. God's anger was kindled because he was going. Boy, God is fickle sometimes, isn't God? And the angel of the Lord took a stand in the road as his adversary. I have to take a moment here. How much time do I have to have this conversation? Not enough. I'll try it anyway. All right. In the Old Testament, there are 4 mentions of the name Satan in most Bible translations. You might recall him from Job. That's not safe. You might recall him from Chronicles. You may not recall him from Chronicles. The Chronicles passage has enough problems in and of itself because in 1 Chronicles it says Well, I say this, in 2 Samuel, it says God induced David to take the census. And in Chronicle, it says, the same passage, Satan induced David to take the census. So we try not to spend too much time trying to figure out whether God made him do it or Satan made him do it, but we'll move on. We'll talk about that some other time. There is it's a pretty good question, though, really, when you think about it. I'll just let that sit for a while. We'll get there. But one other place that no one ever talks about is right here, because you don't see it in there anywhere. But you might notice this word, adversary. The word Satan, the Hebrew verb Satan, that becomes the proper name Satan, simply means to stand against or to stand opposite. All right, so if you think about American football, and I'm going to make you think about American football, the offense and the defense are Satan to one another. They are facing off against one another. In the Old Testament, most of the time, with the exception of the Chronicles passage, that word Satan, that we think of as Satan, occurs with the definite article. In other words, it's the Satan, if you will, the Satan, the adversary, the one who stands against. It also seems, in most of those contexts, it is not the Mr. Satan we're thinking of in the New Testament. It's not the devil that we talk about there. It seems to be, probably the better translation would be prosecuting attorney, the one who is making sure that things are going the way they need to go. And usually, like in Zechariah, that was the other one I didn't mention, Zechariah, and I would even argue in Job, in both of those places, God is acting in a way that actually, is treating that character in that way. In Zechariah, Zechariah says to God, Satan says to God that this high priest Joshua is not worthy and can't serve in that way. And God says, I'll make Joshua worthy and he'll be able to serve in that way. So according to the rule of law in Zechariah, Hasatan is saying, no, you can't do that. And God says, I got this. This is a special exemption for this. So here is the other occurrence of this word, and I have never seen the Bible say that it was Satan who stood opposite of Balaam, and yet that's what it says in Hebrew, that this is la'asatan. It still has the definite article. For the Satan was standing in the road against him or opposite him. Go ahead, Tyler.
Does it not occur with the definite article in the New Testament?
It does not occur with the definite article in the New Testament, and it does not occur with the definite article in Chronicles, which means, in my mind, it's been personified as a title at that point. Yeah, but in the other three occurrences in the Old Testament, it occurs with the definite article, the adversary, prosecuting attorney is the better read there. What's that?
I said I've always been curious, like when theologically that entity came into rabbinic Judaism.
Post-exile.
Post-exile.
Yeah, the exile.
Is it
I told you the answer is always the exile. When you ask me a question, what's the answer? It's always the exile.
Because it seems like something that would have taken from like the Persian dualism.
It is. It is. It's after being exposed to Persian religion that the Jews began to talk about their religion in that way. And that is then reflected in the New Testament. And it doesn't have to trouble you. You can just say God revealed the truth of it through the Persians, or however you want to handle that situation. It doesn't have to give heartburn. It gives a lot of people heartburn. Doesn't have to. But this is an interesting place where that word occurs and no one ever talks. So I'm telling you things that most people don't know. This is all bonus for you right now. Most people don't have any idea that happens. Yeah, Steve, you've been smirking at me since I started this conversation. Okay.
I just keep thinking about Job in the story.
Oh, yes.
Does the adversary live in heaven with God?
The adversary apparently has some sort of job, yes. That the prosecuting attorney, Hasatan in this context, has some sort of job because the angels of the Lord came, the sons of God literally, came to present themselves before the Lord, and Hasatan came among them, and it seems to be modeled on this annual review of God reviewing these sons of God for their responsibilities, because he asks Hasatan, have you considered my servant Job? And Hasatan says, I can't, because you're protecting him. And God says, oh, I won't protect him then, and you can go do your job. I mean, it's that sense of, I can't do my job because of what your way you're treating Job. Seems to be the negotiation in that context. And so then God, well, let's find out then. And then they go on and tell that story. Satan goes right out of the story in chapter 2 of Job and right out of the book of Job. He's never come back in. The book of Job does not portray the contest as a contest between God and Satan. It is completely between God and Job owns it as God and Job. In fact, Job calls God my adversary in the story. In fact, Job's name means adversary, by the way, interestingly enough. That's rough when your name means adversary. So that he's just, I don't want to say he's a prop, but he's not a key figure in that story of Job, as key as he has come to be, because we tend to read the New Testament version of that name back, and translators haven't helped us by translating as the proper name when it's not the proper name in Hebrew. So I just get onto translators again. Yes, Ben?
So why does it throw in the angel of the Lord before Satan is found as Satan?
Say this because
Where does the angel of the Lord come in?
that is the same. That the angel of the Lord is Hasatan in this verse. The messenger of the Lord, because there's no word for angel in Hebrew. The messenger of the Lord stood Hasatan to Balaam. He is Hasatan in the story.
Okay.
But I haven't seen a Bible that's ever said it was Satan that came to Balaam. That would.
I thought if he was the angel of the Lord, he'd be good.
He is.
Really?
Yeah, he's working for God.
Didn't we say angel that's the word for messenger?
It is messenger. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. The only way that you can say angel in Hebrew when you mean divine is son of God. That is a divine being. Or name them, cherubim, seraphim. Those are divine beings. But most of the time they use the generic malach, which is kings can have messengers. Yahweh has messengers. And so this time it's Hasatan, who's the messenger of God.
so like in Job's response, or in God's response to Job, where he says, "Where were you?
Where
when
are you
the sons
created
of
the
God
foundation?"
shouted out for joy."
Right, sons of God will be the divine beings, the heavenly court. Yeah. And when Nebuchadnezzar looks in the fiery furnace and he sees one that looks like a son of God, he doesn't recognize Jesus. We said, how would Nebuchadnezzar recognize Jesus anyway? He said, because his grandmother had that bronze picture on her wall that everyone loved and knew. That's not right. No, it just means I saw a divine being in there. Now you can believe it's the pre-incarnate Christ. I'm just saying don't believe that Nebuchadnezzar recognized him. That's all I'm saying. So, yeah. So, all right. So, okay. Now he was riding on the donkey, and the 2 servants were with him. The donkey saw the angel of the Lord standing in the road and drawn sword in his hand. So the donkey turned off the road and went into the field, and Balaam struck the donkey to turn it back onto the road. Let us take a moment to appreciate the fact this great, famous oracle, or what is the person who gives an oracle? Oracleist. This great, famous prophet who is able to speak about the future and forecast droughts and all the rest, can see the future, can't see an angel in the road, the donkey can. Okay? This is not a subtle dig at the prophet Balaam in this story. The donkey is more perceptive. That's the message here. So, then the angel of the Lord stood in the narrow path between the vineyards with a wall on either side. When the donkey saw the angel of the Lord, it scraped against the wall, scraped Balaam's foot against the wall. So he struck it again. The angel of the Lord went ahead and stood in the narrow place where there was no way to turn to either right or left. When the donkey saw the angel of the Lord, it lay down under Balaam. And Balaam's anger kindled, and he struck the donkey with his staff. Then the Lord opened the mouth of the donkey and said to Balaam, "What have I done to you that you've struck me these 3 times?" Balaam says, "Oh my gosh, it's a donkey." No, he doesn't. He decides to argue with the donkey. Balaam said to the donkey, "Because you made a fool of me. I wish I had a sword in my hand. I would kill you right now." He's not thinking about the cash opportunities of a talking donkey. He's just missing the marketing opportunities. He decides to argue. He is so imperceptive in this story. It is absolutely important. The donkey said to Balaam, "Am I not your donkey, which you have ridden all your life to this day? Have I been in the habit of treating you this way?" So now the donkey is reasoning with Balaam.
Probably the only place in either the Old Testament or, the Hebrew Bible or the New Testament.
Yes?
The verse begins with the donkey.
And the donkey said, yes, the serpent can reply, but the donkey said, and he said, "No, you make a compelling argument, donkey. You have not done this." And the Lord opened the eyes of Balaam. He saw the angel of the Lord standing in the road with drawn sword in his hand, and he bowed down, falling on his face. The angel of the Lord said to him, "Why have you struck your donkey these 3 times? I've come out as your adversary," Hasatan, "because your way is perverse before me. The donkey saw me, turned away from me these 3 times. If it had not turned away, surely now I have killed you and let it live." Then Balaam said to the angel of the Lord, "I have sinned, for I did not know that you were standing in the road to oppose me. Now therefore, if it is displeasing to you, I will return home." The angel of the Lord said to Balaam, "Go with these men, but speak only what I tell you to speak." So Balaam went on from the officials of Balak. When Balak heard that Balaam had come, he went out to meet him in Ir Moab on the boundary formed by the Arnon at the far point of the boundary. Balak said to Balaam, "Did I not send to summon you? Why did you not come to me? Am I not to honor you?" Balaam said to Balak, "I've come to you now, but do I have the power to say just anything? The word God puts in my mouth, that's what I must say." Then Balaam went to Balak, and they came to Kiriath Huzot, Balak sacrificed oxen and sheep and sent them to Balaam and the officials who were with him. So he's gone in. He said, I sent for you. And he goes, well, I can only say what God's going to say. Prophets usually like this answer. By the way, prophets usually give this answer to kings. You're going to tell me what I want to hear? I can only tell you what God tells me, whether you like it or not. This is one of the funniest exchanges ever occurs at the end of 1 Kings when Ahab says to a prophet, he says to Jehoshaphat, we should go because these 450 prophets tell us we should go and attack. And Jehoshaphat says, well, are there prophets of the Lord around here? Telling you what these other prophets were like. And Ahab says, well, I've got one, but he never says anything good about me. So I don't want to talk to him. And so the Jehoshaphat says, you shouldn't say that about a prophet, and bring him in. So the man who goes to get the prophet says, 450 prophets all agree this is a good idea. Just say what they are saying. And the prophet says, I can only say what God can tell me to say, which what the officials got to go, this is going to go somewhere. And he gets there, and Ahab says, so should we attack or not? And the prophet says, you should attack and be victorious. And Ahab doesn't believe him because he only ever says bad things, right? So Ahab says, how many times have I told you to only tell me the truth? And the prophet says, no, attack and be victorious, but you're going to die. And Ahab goes, see, I told you he always says bad things about me. Great story. Well, I can only tell you what God's going to say. So the next day, Balak took Balaam, brought him up to Bamoth Baal, the height of Baal. Bamoth just means a high place, the Bamoth Baal. And from there he could see part of the people of Israel. Then Balaam said to Balak, build me 7 altars here, prepare 7 bulls and 7 rams. Balak did as Balaam had said. Balaam offered a bull and a ram on each altar. I got Balak and Balaam offered a bull. I didn't think I was going to be able to do that publicly. Then Balaam said to Balak, stay here beside your burnt offerings while I go aside. Perhaps the Lord will come to meet me. Whatever he shows me, I will tell you. And he went to a bare height. Then God met Balaam and said, I've arranged the 7 altars, and I've offered a bull and a ram on each altar. The Lord put a word in Balaam's mouth and said, return to Balak, and this is what you must say. So he returned to Balak, who was standing beside the burnt offerings with the officials of Moab. And Balaam uttered oracle saying, Balak has brought me from Aram, the king of Moab, from the eastern mountains. Come curse Jacob for me. Come denounce Israel. How can I curse whom God has not cursed? How can I denounce those from whom the Lord has not denounced? For from the top of the crags I see him, from the hills I behold him. Here is a people living alone and not reckoning itself among the nations. Who can count the dust of Jacob or the number of the dust cloud of Israel? Let me die the death of the upright, and let my end be just like his. He blesses Israel. So he has done exactly opposite what he has been contracted to do by the king of Balak. He has actually gone ahead and blessed Israel. And Balak says, what have you done to me? I brought you here to curse my enemies. Now you've done nothing but bless them. And he said, must I not take care to say what the Lord has put in my mouth? He does this 3 more times. Balak keeps saying, okay, now go curse them. Time after time after time, he won't do it. He blesses them time after time after time. Again, I think significant to draw on the memory of this old, respected, non-extra-biblical prophet as endorsing Israel in this context is, I think, significant memory in all of that. So, questions, comments?
Well, this has to be one of the longest stories of the Bible.
Yes, that doesn't have anyone from Israel in it at all. Yeah. It's that front leg that broke, isn't it? Yeah. It's been pretty weak for a while, so. Okay, story of Balaam, the donkey. No jokes about. This is when the jokes come about who God can use to speak, and usually about the preacher on Sunday mornings. I mean, all sorts of jokes come.
What happens to
If God can. Oh, to Balaam? Yeah, they let him go. Yeah. Well, you can't kill the prophet of the Lord who's been speaking. That's pretty bad, actually, especially when you've contracted.
But he didn't get his commission.
He didn't get his commission, I would guess. No. Now we have the one place name. Well, there's 2 place names in the Bible, but this is one you got to make sure and hit the accent in the right way when you're reading it in church. I would emphasize at this point the masculine plural and put the emphasis on the 2nd syllable if you ever get asked to read something from the Old Testament here and pronounce it as Shittim. That would be my advice. I have heard it various ways. Some of them tremendously awkward, but. Yeah, this is also a place name you get in Joshua a lot, and so whenever somebody's preaching from Joshua, Shittim, that's the way I go. Hit that 2nd syllable. That's what I would argue. While Israel was staying at Shittim, the people began to have sexual relations with the women of Moab. These invited the people to sacrifice to their gods. The people ate and bowed down to their gods. Thus Israel yoked itself with Baal of Peor, and the Lord's anger was kindled against Israel. The Lord said to Moses, take all the chiefs of the people and impale them in the sun before the Lord. I'm sorry, I made myself laugh. In order that the fierce anger of the, it's bad enough when God gets mad. Now it's fierce anger. That's even worse. The fierce anger of the Lord may turn away from Israel. And Moses said to the judges of Israel, each of you shall kill any of your people who have yoked themselves to Baal of Peor. Just then, one of the Israelites came and brought a Midianite woman into his family in the sight of Moses and in the sight of the whole congregation of the Israelites while they were weeping at the entrance of the tent of meeting. So the people who are upset about the disobedience are communally upset about it, and one guy decides to walk in and brazenly show that he doesn't care about their authority or what's going to happen. So Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, so this is Aaron's grandson, Phinehas, with an Egyptian name, which I don't know what that means, but I find that interesting, that he's got an Egyptian name. Means something, I guess. Anyway, Phinehas, son of Eleazar, son of Aaron the priest, saw it, got up, left the congregation, and taking a spear in his hand, he went in after the Israelite man into his tent and pierced the two of them, the Israelite and the woman, through the belly. You realize he only stabbed them once, right? He had one stabbing and got both of them through the belly. There we go. Yeah. Like, well, that seems like a pretty contortionist move.
It says what they're doing.
It
One
does.
paragraph.
We know what they're doing. That's how we stabbed them both through the belly. The plague was stopped among the people of Israel. Nevertheless, those that died by the plague were 24,000. The plague being the vengeance that came upon them because they welcomed the worship of Baal Peor into the group. So, good stories we don't preach on enough. You know, these are just classic Bible stories. This is when I remind folks the Bible, unlike Caleb, is not safe for the entire family. It's just
24,000, go back to note. When they left.
24 Aleph.
Okay, is that noise?
24 units.
Okay.
125 folks to 240 folks, if we're understanding Aleph as a unit instead of 1,000.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Which is significant in a group of, 6,000.
Is this the same Baal that is the God throughout the Old Testament?
Baal just means Lord with a little L. And so it's like Elohim means God. Baal means Lord. The Canaanites get no points for creative names of their gods. The god of the sea was named Yam, which means sea. The god of death was named Mot, which means death. The chief god was named El, which means God. So they really were not particularly creative. So Baal just means Lord. And so you normally have Lord of, right? So it's Baal Peor, Baal Ekron, Baal Shittim, because you have regional associations with these deities. So they're sort of the same one, but they're also different in each location. Yeah. Phinehas is a big deal. The Lord spoke to Moses saying, Phinehas, son of Eleazar, son of Aaron the priest, has turned back my wrath from the Israelites by manifesting such zeal among them on my behalf, that in my jealousy I did not consume the Israelites. Therefore I say, I hereby grant him my covenant of peace. It shall be for him and for his descendants after him a covenant of perpetual priesthood, because he was zealous for his God and made atonement for the Israelites. He shall be a priest forever in Israel. Good for Phinehas. Isn't that great? A forever covenant. Eternal covenants, which, last forever. You know how those eternal covenants always last forever? Because you wouldn't call them perpetual covenants if they didn't last forever, right? It's just a dumb name otherwise. Can you ever imagine an eternal covenant ending? I mean, that's just silly. Unless you've read 1 Samuel, in which case it's less silly, because in 1 Samuel chapter 2, God says to Eli, because of the sins of his sons, I promised to make you an everlasting covenant to go back and forth. And then he says, oh my gosh, let it never be so. God forbid, me forbid. He almost literally says, me forbid that would be the case. So forget it. I'm ending your line at your kids, Eli. They're gone. They're done. So everlasting covenant until it's not. And then it's not an everlasting covenant anymore. So this is one of those places, the only place, well, I say this is the only place we have that, but the covenant of David is one that causes Israel some stress as well in Psalm 89. Now, Christians fix that with Jesus, but it becomes messianic in most Jewish interpretations. But yeah, here, this is an eternal covenant, perpetual priesthood, until, of course, it's not a perpetual priesthood. So, good stuff. The name of the slain Israelite man who was killed with the Midianite woman was Zimri, son of Salu. Why do we care what his name was? But we do. We care his name. Head of the ancestral house belonging to the Simeonites. The name of the Midianite woman who was killed was Cosbi. We rarely ever get this kind of information. It's kind of nice. Daughter of Zur, who was the head of a clan in the ancestral house of Midian. So which is probably why this was such a significant event, is that you had a prominent leader in the community who was joining with a prominent leader in the Midianite community. And so this didn't just represent an individual who was having sexual relations. This was someone who was welcoming and forming covenant with Canaanite group, tribe, which was going to invite Canaanite worship, because marriage brings along religion. That's what we talked about last week. The Bible doesn't have anything to say about interethnic marriage. It has everything to say about interreligious marriage. And this is one of those places where that's going to be a problem, because sex is marriage in the ancient Near East. So
That must be the first obituary.
that's probably is.
This is an example that's been followed.
Exactly.
Add it on.
Yes, that's who never married. Yes, so, right. So they end up fighting the Midianites. This is fascinating to me that the Midianites are the bad guys at the end of Numbers, because you remember Moses' first wife was a Midianite, and he was working for the Midianites for an entire generation. The Bible does this a time or two. David, after he defeats Goliath, when Saul is after him, did you read Samuel enough to know what he does after this happens? He hires himself out as a mercenary to the Philistines. He's working for the Philistines in Samuel after the Goliath story. There are things that happen in the Bible you could never make believable in a movie. No one would ever buy this. He kills Goliath and then hires himself out to work for the Philistines. Here, Midianites, Moses' first wife, Jethro, good guys for him, take him in. They're the bad guys here at the end of Numbers. So, fascinating bunch. Just a real quick comparison. Numbers and Exodus, we were talking about this. People sacrificed to other gods. They killed the apostates. The Levites in Exodus are commended for their faith. Phinehas is commended for his faith here, and we get a plague on the people mentioned both times. I will say that you do get a little bit more positive picture in Numbers here at the end, because Aaron is sort of, any way the wind blows doesn't seem to matter to him, but Phinehas actually seems to have a backbone to stand up for the concern. So he does seem to have a zealous concern for Yahweh, where Aaron always was on the wrong side of every problem at the end of the story, just all the way there. So
Did Eliezer die, or just all of a sudden
Phinehas has just come to prominence. Yeah, Phinehas has just come to prominence. Mm-hmm. See here, he says, after the plague, the Lord said to Moses and to Eleazar, son of Aaron, the priest, take a census of the whole congregation of Israelites, from 20 years old and upward by their ancestral houses, everyone who's able to go to war. So Moses and Eleazar the priest spoke with them in the plains of Moab by the Jordan. So we've made it all the way up now to the very northwest corner of the Dead Sea, opposite Jericho, saying, take a census of the people from 20 years old and upward, as the Lord commanded Moses. So now we are actually going to see how many the generation that was born, that was under 20 when they came out of Egypt, numbers at the end of the story, now to go into the land. Because remember, everybody over 20 dies. So now how many are left? I think there's hope here at the end, because Phinehas that gives you some hope. Even with the death of the first generation, the numbers between the beginning of Numbers and the end of Numbers are almost the same number. They're really very close. So it's not like the disobedience made them take a hit in that regard. And the census in this case is to give the appropriate land allotment. The more in the tribe, the bigger the land area. They're going to cast lots for it later, because you don't want to just leave that to chance. So you got to cast lots. Just a reminder of how differently they think than we do, right? They would cast lots because God's in charge of the lots, so it's not happening by chance. And then we come to the end of the story. Those that were enrolled by Moses and Eleazar the priest, who enrolled the Israelites in the plains of Moab opposite them, there was not one who was enrolled. Among these, there was not one of those enrolled by Moses and Aaron who had enrolled the Israelites in the wilderness of Sinai. So in other words, totally different folks. Okay? The Lord had said, they shall die in the wilderness. Not one was left except Caleb, son of Jephunneh, and Joshua, son of Nun. And when they got there, it was the same number. I was going to tell the story of the daughters of Zelophehad, but we're going to have to talk about them when we get into Joshua, I think. But they're good folks, the daughters there. So, questions or comments or concerns as we wrap up the book of Numbers?
So references to plagues here is often a metaphor for the curse.
Violence that has suffered, yeah.
Curse by God.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because there was a reference to that last week, it just came out of nowhere.
Yeah, that's what that is. Yeah, Tom?
So when it says he's cursing people who are yoked to follow the POA,
Mm-hmm.
that word yoked, is there any significance to that?
I mean, it could be a reference to marriage. I was going to find the right word, but it left me. But again, sex is marriage. It's hard for us to separate that. I mean, even in the case in Judges 19, the man and his concubine, her father is called his father-in-law. So even though they wouldn't have the formal declaration of marriage, you wouldn't think of a concubine as a wife. In the ancient mindset, he's still a father-in-law. I mean, so sex is marriage. And so yoking in that regard could probably just be a euphemism for sex at that point. Yeah. Other questions or comments? Yes, ma'am.
Well, you often say that the Old Testament God is the same as the New Testament.
I do often say that. I was kind of hoping there wouldn't be any questions about that this evening. But that's okay, Mary. Go ahead.
But he really sounds capricious. I give you an eternal covenant, but then I don't give you an
until you don't want to
covenant,
participate in it.
and
Yeah.
you make me angry because you strike the rock instead of speaking to it. And
Mhm.
how does that?
The eternal covenant thing I can talk about easily, and that is that if you are not willing to participate in it, God is not going to be mocked by you. When we talk about conditional and unconditional covenants, we're probably putting an artificial designation on that. Because if you're not participating in it, then God is not, you don't get to have the benefits of it if you're not participating in it, if you're not representing God well. Nothing makes God angrier than representing God badly. I think God would rather have them out of the covenant behaving the way they're behaving than taking the covenant and behaving the way they're behaving. And so David's descendants in that way are mocked, are taken away, and the covenant's taken away, and here Phinehas is taken away. Now, in fairness, that's the only two places. But it is a place where God has said, eternal covenant and I say it's the only two places. God tells Abraham that his descendants get the land, and then the exile comes along and revokes that. So that's probably another place where he forecloses on it because they don't. Now, Deuteronomy stresses the necessity of obedience to keep it, but Genesis doesn't. So I think that we like to use words like conditional and unconditional, but I don't think that's the ancient mindset of that. I think that these covenants are participatory, and if you're not participating in it, then you obviously don't want to be part of it, so that absolves God on that level. And as far as Moses is concerned and his reason to not go in, I do think that's the concern of his specialness and disobedience in that. I mean, it seems like a small thing, but he's going to be held to a higher standard. God spoke to him directly. Why do you not do exactly what God who spoke to you directly says? And if you have a concern about your leadership, then maybe talk to God about that, or trust that God will maintain your leadership in that way. So I don't think that one is as capricious. I was afraid you were going to talk about the violence. That's the one that gets me a little bit here. But yeah, when we get to Joshua, I'll try to handle that a little bit.
Okay, I'll wait.
Yeah, we'll get there. I promise we won't skip that part. Other thoughts before you have to go to choir? Oh, you have to go to choir. All right. Well, thanks so much. You guys have a great night.
Thanks, Ron.
Thanks so much for coming.
Thank you. Thank you.
Next week, we'll continue this little journey. I think I might hold on to the Daughters of Zelophehad next week, because they're great folks. My wife will be here next week, as will Thomas, so that'll be fun. Let me stop recording before you guys end up on the internet.